Good morning. Today is Friday. Yay. All right, so today is Friday, November 6th. We are on day 3 of Module 2 in Wit and Wisdom. And we had a pretty intense lesson today. So I'm going to go ahead and just get started. And I'm going to try really hard not to mess the video up today. I don't know what I did yesterday, but I did something wrong. Okay.
Welcome back, amazing thinkers. I'm Sue Sabelli, your Great Minds teacher. Let's see what we need for today. Today we'll need the Buffalo Are Back, handout 3A, your journal, your pencil, and some scissors. Pause here to gather what you need, and then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so you are not going to need the scissors, and you are not going to need the handout 3A. I already have a set that we are going to use that's already cut out. So you just need your journal, and I have a copy of the Buffalo Are Back, and you need a pencil.
People, plants, and animals are connected in so many ways. Today, we'll be exploring some of those connections. What does looking at connections between people, plants, and animals reveal to us or show us? Today, we'll be exploring connections between different people, buffalo, and the prairie. You'll be pausing here to grab handout 3A and your scissors. Once you have those materials, please cut the cards out on the dotted lines. We'll be using these cards again, so when we're finished with today's lesson, remember, keep the cards and keep them together. Pause here to cut out the cards on the dotted lines. If you do not have this sheet, you can also use scrap paper to make your own cards. Just be sure to include the label. Pause here to cut or to create your own cards, and then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so remember, guys, you do not have a copy of this. I already have the cards already cut out that we are going to use together. Okay, we're just going to keep moving on.
Let's begin by taking a look at the topic-specific vocabulary or the labels on these cards. We have the government, settlers, buffalo, President Theodore Roosevelt, American Indians, prairie, the grasses. Pause here to make sure that you have your cards spread out in front of you, either on a table or on the floor, so you can easily see each picture and read each label. Just hit play when you're ready to continue. As I read parts of the Buffalo Are Back, I want you to pull out the cards that connect to this part of the story. Ready? Here we go. The Indians who lived on the plains were setting the grasses ablaze, as they had for thousands of years. The fire was good for the prairie. The calf may have been afraid of the flames, but they kept the trees from taking over the grasslands. The fire's ashes put nutrients into the soil, making the grass healthier for the buffalo that ate it. As you were listening, you probably heard the word Indians, prairie, grasslands, and even buffalo. What I'd like you to do is pause here to think about how these three pictures are connected based on the evidence from this text. Take plenty of time to think about the connection and to chat about the connection with a learning partner. Then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, the cards that we have for this section of the book are American Indians, grasses, the prairie grasses, and the buffalo. And these three pictures are connected because according to the book, what were the Native Americans doing to the grasses? What were they doing? The Native Americans were burning the grasses. They were they were catching them on fire. Why? Why does the book say they were doing that? Because it helped the prairie, it helped the trees from overtaking all of the grasses, and the rich nutrients from the soil or from the ashes would get down in the soil and then make the grasses that regrew in the spring more fertile and healthier. So how are the buffalo connected to the grasses? What do buffaloes eat? Okay, so obviously that's one obvious connection. But what did the book tell us about their hooves? How are their hooves helpful to the grasses? It talked about how the buffalo's sharp pointed hooves would dig holes down into the grass. And then when it rained, the rainwater would be able to go down, into the grasses and give it lots of water and wash down all of those, the ash and the nutrients in the ash from where they were burned, which would make the grasses healthier. How are the Indians connected to the buffalo? Well, what did the Native Americans eat? How did the Native Americans get their clothing? How did the Native Americans get their shelter for the skin for their teepees? How did the Native Americans get tools from the bones of the buffalo? Okay, so the Native Americans used every part of buffalo's body as food and clothing and shelter and tools. But how were the Native Americans helpful to the buffalo? I mean, they killed them, right? But how did the Native Americans help them? By the Native Americans burning the grasses and keeping the grasses healthy and from being overrun by the trees, that made it easier for the buffalo to be able to eat. And the buffalo then helped the Native Americans to survive. So all three of those pictures are connected. Okay, let's go back to our video.
We learned in the text that the Indians set the grasses ablaze, and they did that for thousands of years. The fire was good for the prairie. It kept the trees from overtaking the grasslands, and the fire's ashes put nutrients into the soil, and that made the grass healthier for the buffalo that ate it. Let's keep reading, and be sure to choose the cards when you hear those words in the text. Ready? Here we go. Early settlers were ranchers and cowboys. They brought fences and cattle to the plains. The cattle did not roam, so they ate too much of the grass within their fences. Their flat hooves packed the earth. Air and rainwater no longer reached into the soil. Later, settlers wanted to farm the land, so they tore out the grass and planted crops to sell. When the buffalo lived on the prairie, their sharp hooves helped rain reach deep into the earth, and the tough roots of the grass held in the wet. Now, no moisture remained in the soil. The farmers' crops withered and died. What connections did you hear? Pause here to put your cards together and also to have a chat with your learning partner. Scroll back if you'd like to listen to it again and move those cards around. Connect them to each other based on the evidence in the text. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so which of these cards would you put together based on what Miss Sabella just read to us? I think that I would definitely put the buffalo and the settlers and the prairies together. And do that because what I heard Miss Sabella talking about was how the settlers came and they brought their cattle with them. And the cattle would use their flat hooves to stamp and walk all over the prairie grasses. And the prairie grasses need the sharp, pointy hooves of the buffalo to get the water so that they can survive. But the buffalo were all gone. So, which three did you pick? And tell me why. And then just push play when you're ready to go on.
When you read the whole text aloud with your classroom teacher, you learned about the connection between the buffalo and the settlers. The settlers were encouraged to shoot the buffalo. Therefore, many of the buffalo disappeared from the prairie. Because the settlers had an impact on the buffalo, they also had an impact on the prairie. I'd like you to pause here to chat with your learning partner about the connection between the settlers and the prairie. Just hit play when you're ready to continue. We learned from the text that the settlers brought fences and cattle to the plains, and the cattle did not roam. They ate too much of the grass within their fences, and the cattle had flat hooves that packed the earth. Those hooves were not sharp. The air and the rainwater no longer reached into the soil, and the crops withered and died. Let's explore another connection. Make sure you have your cards ready. Here we go. Roosevelt established the National Bison Range in Montana and made it illegal to shoot buffalo. Over the years, more land was set aside in western states for the great grazing herds, which were beginning to grow. The government worked to save the prairie. Farmers were taught to plant and grow crops in curves instead of straight lines. The contour plowing helped to prevent dirt from blowing away. Government workers planted trees with deep roots to hold moisture in the soil and break the wind. When the rains returned, farmers planted grass between their curving rows of corn to hold the soil in place. Crops flourished again. Pause here to group your cards together in order to make a connection. Also, talk about your connection out loud, either with me or with a learning partner. Scroll back on the timeline if you'd like to listen to it again, and then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so what I want you to do is think about which cards would you have based on what Miss Sabella said, and then tell someone near you, or just tell me out loud, why you put those cards together and how they are connected. And then just hit play when you're ready.
Here are the cards for President Roosevelt, the buffalo, and the prairie. Please point to each card as you describe the connection between these cards. Be sure to use evidence from the text. Pause here to practice that. Take as much time as you need, and then just hit play to continue.
Okay, so now we have three specific cards. We have President Roosevelt, the buffalo, and the prairie grasses. So I want you to think about how are these three things connected, and then out loud tell me how they're connected.
We learned in the text that President Roosevelt established the National Bison Range in Montana, and that made it illegal to shoot buffalo. Over the years, more land was even set aside in western states so the herds could grow. President Roosevelt had a direct impact on the buffalo, and as a result, he also had an impact on the prairie. There's the check mark in the corner, and you know what that means. Your teacher has an opportunity to check in with you and check your understanding. So, what I'd like you to do is to make a connection between the pictures and write about that connection in your journal. Remember, it's helpful if you put your pictures together first, practice it out loud, and then write your sentence in your journal. Pause here to think about a connection based on the evidence that we've read in the book. Practice your sentence out loud and then write it in your journal. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so on page 51 of your knowledge response journal today, so we're on page 51. Okay, you are going to write that question. Write about one connection using the response cards 3A. And I'm going to put them back up on the screen so you can look at them. But you are going to pick, I would like 2 or 3 different cards, and you're going to write and tell me how they are connected. Okay, you're going to tell me the 3 cards. Like I'm going to say that, let's see, I'm looking at my cards. Government, settlers, buffalo. Those are the 3 that I'm going to use. So I'm going to write those words on my paper. I'm going to write government, settlers, and buffalo. Okay, so those are the 3 I chose. You can choose any 3. That is your decision, your choice. But now I'm going to write and tell how are those 3 things connected. Okay, and I know from what I've read and what I've learned so far that the government sent settlers out west and told them to kill as many buffalo as they could. So that's how my 3 are connected. So I'm going to put the cards back up on the screen for you so that you can look at them. Go all the way back right there. Okay, so I'm going to leave it just like this. I want you to pause the video and then do the activity on page 51 and then hit play when you are ready to continue.
Question to yourself, and then we'll read it together.
Okay, our question is, how did the actions of the American Indians and early Americans impact the prairie in the American West?
How did the actions of the American Indians and early Americans impact the prairie in the American West? Today, you'll be using an evidence organizer to gather evidence from the text to help you answer this question. Please pull out the following cards: the American Indians, the settlers, and President Theodore Roosevelt. Pause here to do that, and then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
We're just going to keep going because I already have them pulled out.
Now that we have our cards, we're ready to think about how these linking words, first, then, and finally, can help us think about these people and how they connect to each other, and also how they connect to the American West. Go ahead and get your cards out so you can move them around either on a table or on the floor in front of you as we talk about the people in these pictures and when they came to the prairie. First, the American Indians came to the prairie, then the settlers, and finally the Roosevelt government. Each group had an impact on the prairie, which means they had a strong effect on the prairie. How did the American Indians have an impact on the prairie? Pause here to think about that question, to reread, or to chat with your learning partner. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so what impact did the American Indians have on the prairie? What did they do for the prairie? They were burning the grasses to keep it from getting overrun with trees and other bushes. They were making sure that the buffalo were healthy and not overpopulated, so that kept the grasses healthier. Well, let's see what Miss Sabella says.
We learned in The Buffalo Are Back that the American Indians burned the grass to keep the soil and the grass healthy. How did the settlers impact the prairie? Pause here to do some thinking or to chat with a learning partner. Then just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so what did the settlers do? How did they affect, or what was their impact on the prairie? So we know that they shot the buffalo, they killed the buffalo. So there were no hooves to help keep the soil healthy. They brought in cattle and horses, which ate too much grass, and their flat hooves squished the soil down and packed it down instead of making the water be able to get in it. And we know that they tore up all these grasses so that they could plant their crops. And the grasses are what helped keep the soil, part of what helped keep the soil healthy and from flying away.
Many of the settlers shot buffalo. There were then no hooves for healthy soil. The settlers brought cattle, and the cattle ate too much grass, and their flat hooves packed the soil. The settlers also tore out the grass to plant crops. The settlers had a strong effect on the prairie. They had an impact on the prairie. How did the Roosevelt government have an impact on the prairie? Pause here to do some thinking or to chat with a learning partner. And remember, it's always okay to go back to the book. Just hit play when you're ready to continue.
Okay, so what are some things that the Roosevelt government did? Remember President Roosevelt? Didn't he make it illegal for people to shoot buffalo? And he helped create the Buffalo Preserve, and he helped create the grass preserve, the grasses, and let's see what else he did.
President Roosevelt made a safe place for the buffalo. They made a preserve. The Roosevelt government taught farmers how to plant crops in curves instead of straight lines so they could keep the soil healthy. The Roosevelt government also planted trees so the trees and the roots of the trees would keep more moisture in the ground. The Roosevelt government had a strong effect on the prairie. The Roosevelt government had an impact on the prairie. Pause here to read over the evidence organizer and to discuss it with a learning partner. Just hit play when you're ready to wrap up our video lesson.
Okay, so we can tell by looking at all three of these sections that all three of these groups of people had an impact on the prairie, okay? The American Indians were really good for the prairie. They helped keep it healthy. They helped keep the buffalo alive, which then in turn helped keep the grasses and the soil healthy. So the American Indians and the buffalo and the grasses, they all worked together beautifully. They helped keep each other alive and keep each other healthy. But then the settlers came, and the settlers did not understand how to handle the prairie. So they shot all the buffalo. And because the buffalo weren't there was no hooves for them to be able to have healthy soil. They brought out the cattle and the horses, which made the soil even worse because they squished all the dirt down and there couldn't get any water down in there. They tore up all the grasses so they could plant crops that ended up not being able to grow very well there because of the soil. So the settlers had a negative or a bad impact on the prairie. And then finally, the Roosevelt government realized what was going on and realized how bad it was. And so they decided to try to save it, to try to make things better. So they made a safe place for the buffalo and they made a safe place for the grasses to grow again. And they planted those trees to try to help the soil stay in place. And they educated the farmers on how to properly farm in that area, how to keep the soil healthy. So the Roosevelt government had a positive, a good impact on the prairie.
When we explore the connections between people, plants, and animals, we can better understand our world and also the past, just like historians do. Today, you discovered many connections between the American Indians, the early Americans, and the prairie. Share that knowledge with others, and I'll see you again very soon.
Okay, so you have two things that you are supposed to do today in your knowledge response journal. On page 51, you chose 3 cards and you told me how those 3 cards or picture cards are related. And then on page 52, you are going to copy down the evidence organizer, and there will be a picture of this up on the Google Classroom. So all you need to do is copy it on page 52, okay? Page 52. And then you're going to take a picture of those and post it so that I can see that you actually did it, okay? And today's secret word, I didn't give you a secret word yesterday, I forgot. Today's secret word is cranberry. Cranberry. I like cranberries. All right, so today's secret word is cranberry. And thank you to those of you who are telling me what the secret word is. I appreciate that. I'm getting messages in Clever, I'm getting emails, I'm getting messages on the Google Classroom. I love that. That shows me that you are actually watching the video all the way through. Sometimes it'll be at the beginning, sometimes it'll be in the middle, sometimes it'll be in the end. sometimes I decided I won't give you one. That way, when you say their secret word, I'll know you were watching. You guys have a great morning, and I will see you later for phonics.